Hi Lucian and Awesome and anyone else who's watching. I know you've been enjoying the poems, and whilst I've been reading poems which are mostly funny, I thought I'd actually read some poems today written by a very famous Australian poet called Banjo Paterson. You might have heard of him already. His real name was Andrew Barton Paterson, and he's the person that is supposed to have written Waltzing Matilda, and I think you know that poem that was turned into a famous Australian song. The first poem I'm going to read you is quite a well-known one called Clancy of the Overflow, and it's quite a serious poem that deals with the differences between living in the city and living out in the bush or the countryside. And it's about someone who'd met a drover out in the countryside, and he decided to write him a letter. Clancy of the Overflow. I had written him a letter, which I had, for want of better knowledge, sent to where I met him down the Lachlan years ago. He was shearing when I knew him, so I sent the letter to him, just on spec, addressed as follows: Clancy of the Overflow. And an answer came directed in a writing unexpected, and I think the same was written with a thumbnail dipped in tar. 'Twas his shearing mate who wrote it, and verbatim I will quote it. Clancy's gone to Queensland droving, and we don't know where he are. In my wild erratic fancy, visions come to me of Clancy, gone a droving down the Cooper, where the western drovers go. As the stock are slowly stringing, Clancy rides behind them singing, for the drover's life has pleasures that we townsfolk never know. And the bush has friends to meet him, and their kindly voices greet him, in the murmur of the breezes and the river on its bars. And he sees the vision splendid of the sunlit plains extended, and at night the wondrous glory of the everlasting stars. Well, I am sitting in my dingy little office, where a stingy ray of sunlight struggles feebly down between the houses tall, and the fetid air and gritty of the dusty, dirty city through the open window floating spreads its foulness over all. And in place of lowing cattle, I can hear the fiendish rattle of the tramways and the buses making hurry down the street, and the language uninviting of the gutter children fighting comes fitfully and faintly through the ceaseless tramp of feet. And the hurrying people daunt me, and their pallid faces haunt me, as they shoulder one another in their rush and nervous haste. With their eager eyes and greedy, and their stunted forms and weedy, for townsfolk have no time to grow, they have no time to waste. And I somehow rather fancy that I'd like to change with Clancy, like to take a turn at droving where the seasons come and go, while he faced the round eternal of the cash book and the journal. But I doubt he'd suit the office. Clancy of the Overflow. And here's a painting painted by Pro Hart of some drovers in the outback. The next poem by A.B. Paterson, Banjo Paterson, I'd like to read you, is one of my favourites of his, and it's called Mulga Bill's Bicycle, and it's about someone who thinks they are a much better bike rider than they actually are. The place where it's set is Eaglehawk, which is just outside Bendigo. Now that's close by where your pa John was born. Well, actually, he grew up there. 'Twas Mulga Bill from Eaglehawk that caught the cycling craze. He turned away the good old horse that served him many days. He dressed himself in cycling clothes, resplendent to be seen. He hurried off to town and bought a shining new machine. And as he wheeled it through the door with air of lordly pride, the grinning shop assistant said, "Excuse me, can you ride?" "See here, young man," said Mulga Bill, "from Walgett to the sea, from Conroy's Gap to Castlereagh, there's none can ride like me. I'm good all round at everything, as everybody knows. Although I'm not the one to boast, I hate a man that blows. But riding, well, that's my special gift, my chiefest sole delight. Just ask a wild duck, can it swim? A wildcat, can it fight? There's nothing clothed in hair or hide or built of flesh or steel. There's nothing walks or jumps or runs on axle, hoof or wheel. But what I'll sit, while hide will hold and girths and straps are tight, I'll ride this here two-wheeled concern right straight away at sight." 'Twas Mulga Bill from Eaglehawk that sought his own abode, that perched above the Dead Man's Creek beside the mountain road. He turned the cycle down the hill and mounted for the fray, but ere he'd gone a dozen yards, it bolted clean away. It left the track, and through the trees, just like a silver streak, it whistled down the awful slope towards the Dead Man's Creek. It shaved a stump by half an inch. It dodged a big white box. The very wallaroos in fright went scrambling up the rocks. The wombats hiding in their caves dug deeper underground. But Mulga Bill, as white as chalk, sat tight to every bound. It struck a stone and gave a spring that cleared a fallen tree. It raced beside a precipice as close could be. And then, as Mulga Bill let out one last despairing shriek, it made a leap of 20 feet right into Dead Man's Creek. 'Twas Mulga Bill from Eaglehawk that slowly swam ashore. He said, "Whoa, I've had some narrow shaves and lively rides before. I've rode a wild bull round a yard to win a £5 bet, but this was sure the darndest ride that I've encountered yet. I'll give that two-wheeled outlaw best. It's shaken all my nerve to feel it whistle through the air and plunge and buck and swerve. It's safe at rest in Dead Man's Creek. We'll leave it lying still. A horse's back is good enough henceforth for Mulga Bill." And here's a picture, again painted by Prohart, of Mulga Bill in Dead Man's Creek with his bicycle. And I think the bicycle is still there.